Minimalism as a popular trend has grown and embedded itself into our lifestyle, right from the way we design homes to how we navigate digital interfaces. But despite being largely integrated into our lives, some groups of people often criticize minimalistic design as being dull, lifeless, and an assault on life itself. These groups claim that the popularity of minimalist art is driven by corporate greed and has come at the cost of killing classical aesthetics, which was full of character and zest, unlike minimalistic expressions of art. Their message? To revive classical aesthetics into the mainstream again and bring life to our surroundings, so to speak. For a long time, they have perpetuated this idea by largely showcasing the takeover by metallic colors, comparing ornate objects of the past to the current minimal forms, and much more. There is no doubt that their narratives are compelling. In fact, their revivalist ideas seem to have picked up significant steam in the recent years. And that brings up questions. How can a design principle that is scientifically integrated into the modern life be bad? Perhaps minimalistic design philosophy is indeed driven by greed and fails to deliver the essence classical aesthetics are known for. Well, if you find yourself sliding in that direction, let me stop you right there, because this narrative is nothing more than a sweeping statement. It stems from limited information, a narrow outlook into the subject, and a fairly common cognitive bias. Stay around until the end as we challenge this idea and make some insightful revelations that might permanently change your view on this topic. Think about this. Imagine that you lived your life for 30 years, which, for the most part, remained uneventful. And yet, when you dive into the nostalgia of those years, they seem so special. This is not by coincidence. Psychology says that reminiscing the past feels better than it was originally experienced by individuals. This is what we call nostalgia bias or Rosy Retrospection, a cognitive bias where people tend to recall the past more positively than it actually was, often overlooking negative aspects or focusing on positive generalities. Rosy retrospection about movies or dating by older generations is quite common and even normal. It allows people from different generations to share lighter moments and acknowledge the generation gap respectfully at the same time. However, when mixed with socio-political elements, Rosy retrospection can create a powerful cocktail which can induce cultural and ideological nostalgia. This can be potentially dangerous and can be used to create culture-based propaganda. Seems like the same cognitive bias is at play to stir Rosy retrospection and induce ideological nostalgia for classical aesthetics in common people. There is always a sense of having lost the details and beauty into these narratives all the time. They shun minimalism and aspire to bring classical art back into the mainstream to make things lively again. While it is a noble thought, I think this is a ridiculous statement. Let me explain why. First, it ignores the fact that we are wired to pay attention to visuals that are simpler in nature. And second, these groups conflate and present the idea as a logical fallacy where only two states of expression exist. One before classical aesthetics and the other when classical aesthetics is overrun by minimalism. Let's discuss the first one. The reason we prefer minimalistic layouts is because they are easy to process. Our brains have a limited capacity of processing information at any given time. If too much information or higher cognitive load is thrown at it, learning suffers. Minimalistic design helps reduce this cognitive overload through multiple ways. The generous white spaces in app interfaces, the intuitive navigation, and the clear hierarchy of information is integral to minimalistic design. Unlike ornate details that exist purely for aesthetic value, elements in minimalistic design fulfill our subconscious psychological necessities. Even logos follow similar principles. While they may look simple, they have a complex construction, use of colors, and overall presentation. This is necessary because a logo employs the least amount of visual information to convey complex messages about a brand or a company. Additionally, they must be timeless and should have a high cognitive efficiency for quick recognition. Classical aesthetics does not allow one to accomplish this complex expression that lay at the foundation of our modern world. And if you think that is possible by any means, just look at the structures with limited spaces or canvas such as coins or seals. The expression was limited and even crippled. Even pagan symbols that were not limited by size cannot convey what a minimal logo can, despite all their ornate details and richness. Overall, a revivalist's version of company logos derived from old aesthetics will not only be impractical but also funny at the same time. This reveals a simple truth about design philosophies, and that is, function trumps ornamentation. If revivalists want to win entirely on ornamentation, they must offer something extravagant or grand. Because most of the time, people think without any burdens of their glorious past. And when they do so, they tend to evaluate something ornate totally on grandeur, extravagance, or interesting history, not function. Of course, unless they are brainwashed with Rosy Retrospection, which can delude them to side with the revivalist narrative despite their heart standing against it. If you look across the world, the list of abandoned historical places with ornate details are plenty. People reject these places because they are neither grand or extravagant and do not possess any interesting history whatsoever. The St. Lars Church in Sweden and Santo Stefano in Italy falls in this category. Once grand structure, they are now left in ruins due to shifting priorities. Another example could be the Church of St. Nicholas in Poland. Coastal erosion swallowed this once functional structure, leaving only fragments. If people really loved old aesthetics more than soulless minimalistic art, then these places could have had a better plight. And this is not limited to Europe alone. Asia also has multiple places that originated from classical aesthetics of the region, but received little to no attention from people. Until these places were recognized and revived by bodies like UNESCO, the general public did not even know they existed. But despite their revival, these structures could not become large crowd pullers. Hence, the idea that classical aesthetics enjoys high preference over lifeless minimal aesthetics is nothing but a gross generalization. Anything standing alone on aesthetic and cosmetic value can only stand the test of time if it surpasses a threshold of beauty and grandeur. However, something built on top of minimalistic philosophy is not bound by these limitations. They are more likely to be timeless. And I'm not talking about modern art or recent architecture here. I'm referring to old structures built with minimalistic design philosophy. A classical example of that could be the Parthenon. Built in the 5th century BCE, the Parthenon seamlessly brings together architectural simplicity and functional brilliance at one place. The structure employs golden ratio along with optical illusions, reflecting a deep understanding of the human perception, a hallmark of minimalistic philosophy. Not only has the Parthenon become symbolic of Western civilization, democracy, and philosophy, its functional aspects have influenced the design of countless government buildings, banks, and other major institutions. The Parthenon shows that minimalism functions as an underlying natural principle with lasting functional value, something classical design with its artsy details has failed to achieve. But that does not mean that details are dead as most revivalists presume them to be. Ornate details were never out of the mainstream. Perhaps they are absent in the styles that are prevalent in the West in the current times. Details do exist in other styles and aesthetics. For example, Japanese art forms such as Ghibli are a blend of both minimal and detailed elements. The characters in Ghibli style are often minimal with large round eyes. The purpose is to capture the essence of Ghibli, which is wonder, nostalgia, and empathy. In contrast, the backgrounds in Ghibli feature a lot of details. Works of popular artists like Makoto Shinkai feature details in photographic precision in lighting, architecture, and nature that creates immersive worlds. This is what brings us to the bottom line, and that is, creators and consumers do not bother how ornate or minimal something really is. As long as they can create and enjoy immersive and engaging forms of art, it is fine. Does not matter if it is made with classical European aesthetics, Japanese art forms, minimalism, Vedic art, or anything else. One example that illustrates this tendency is of French illustrator Raphael Lacoste, who worked on award-winning games like Assassin's Creed and Prince of Persia. The art style used to create the characters and environment in these games are derived from classical Western art. Since games are a form of entertainment without any functional aspect, classical aesthetics resonate with the game's theme and contribute greatly to the gamer's experience. Finally, one must realize that expressions of art is not limited to a few forms in the current day and age. It has fragmented into multiple forms that are robust and cost-effective at the same time. Today, there are just more ways to express oneself. Of course, design philosophies such as minimalism have greater impact than other forms of art and design philosophies at the current time. Having said that, not all expressions of minimalism are noble. Many companies often exploit the idea of minimalism to justify cost cutting while projecting virtues of sustainability, care for the environment, and much more. Be it phones without chargers or timeless essentials from fast fashion, they all exploit the idea of minimalism to not only transfer costs on the end consumer but also project a noble image at the same time. Revivalists often point to this exploitation as one of the reasons which makes minimalism mainstream. We know that phones without chargers reduce carbon footprint for the company, giving it a green tag. But in reality, it transfers the cost of charger onto the consumer while saving shipping costs for the company. Similarly, fast fashion brands promote flat colors as cool, but in reality, they do so to avoid embroidery, prints, or trims that can boost the shelf life of the garment, something fast fashion brands do not want. This is because the faster you discard, the faster is their sales. But despite all the greed, the facade and everything, the benefits of minimalism far outweighs its cons, so much that it easily negates the idea of ideological nostalgia. In the end, I would like to say that by no means this video aims to promote minimalist design philosophy while slamming classical and contemporary aesthetics. Classical aesthetics and design have a global fan base. Any passerby, whether they are an enthusiast or not, is bound to stand and appreciate the beauty of these expressions of art. However, mixing it with cognitive bias and promoting this idea that there is some conspiracy to erode the elements of a culture is wrong. But can we stop this flawed narrative from propagating into the masses? The answer is no. Rosy retrospection from classical aesthetics is bound to happen. This is because the new generation is presented with a curated form of the past through social media. Usually, it is an idealized view of the past without pointing its mundane reality. When someone fond of classical aesthetics evokes feelings of joy, rebellion, or freedom, the younger generation tends to fall for those back in those days phrases. These phrases often serve as the starting point of nostalgia bias, which later shapes into ideological nostalgia. Once someone has entered this territory, reasoning takes a backseat. But despite all of that, we cannot help but remain empathetic to these individuals. Perhaps they are searching for an idea or place to belong, but for the ones who are aware, who seek the truth, they know that progression is perpetual and always happening, marching in sync with the wheel of time. Trends are always rising and crashing, and while some remain relevant for a long period of time, others fade into this void, leaving nothing but relics. Our collective responsibility as a society is exploration of these pieces and not idealization. Please like, share, and subscribe if you loved the content.